Yes, I am. I'm quite far from Hiroshima City, unfortunately, but yeah, I'm in a little town called Akitsu, which is on the Seto Inland Sea, about roughly halfway between Mihara and Hiroshima City.
Yeah. And I'm so excited to have you on. I saw that you had done an interview with Imada Miho, who is the Toji at Fukucho, where you are, what is it, Kurabito? And so I was so
Kurabito, yeah.
excited. And I was thinking, what? He's in Hiroshima. I'm in Hiroshima. I want to talk to him, you know? So it's so great to have you on the show, even though we are still communicating via computer. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much.
No, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. But of course, yeah, I'd love to actually, be able to enjoy Hiroshima eventually. I've been here 2 years, and I think I've been, out in the city twice, maybe. So, yeah, definitely looking forward to the first proper drink after the pandemic is over. So.
That'll be really exciting, won't it? When the bars kind of open back up and we can get back after vaccination, kind of get back to that bar atmosphere again without worrying too much. Let's talk a little bit, Andrew, about how you got interested in sake. I think that's a really interesting story. Until 2011, you were working in the car industry. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a completely different job. Obviously, it's yeah. I left school quite a young age. I was actually 16 when I left school, and at that time I didn't know if I was going to go to university or not. But I was offered a job working for a BMW franchise in Edinburgh, my hometown, and it was just too good a job opportunity to pass up. So I joined them, and 12 years later, you start, you've committed so much of your life to this, all-consuming job, that I just wanted to do something different. And that was the first time I came to Japan, and it wasn't supposed to be anything more than just a year, like a gap year that I could never have done, because I missed out on that part of my life. So. But yeah, from there, it just kind of, spiraled into this, this kind of fascination with Japan. And yeah, the next thing I knew, I was studying there. And then, the next stage after that, here I am working in a traditional sake brewery. So it's all very kind of difficult to get your head around when you think back to that, my previous job, and the journey that it's taken to end up where I am. But delighted that I did it. It was a very good decision. So.
Yeah, what was it about Japan, or what was it about sake that you were initially so interested in that you wanted to study it? For one, you have a master's in Japanese history from Edinburgh University, and you came back to do your research and write your dissertation back in Japan. So what was it initially that made you so interested in sake?
Well, the real thing, sake kind of really pushed me into it in a roundabout way. The funny story was, I never actually got into it on purpose. At the very beginning, when I was in my first year at Edinburgh University, I was a mature student. So most of the people around me, in fact, nearly everyone was a lot younger. And vast majority were into things like anime and manga and things like that. I had no interest in that side of things at all. I liked watching samurai films and reading books about history and things. But at Edinburgh, every year they have this week where they suspend classes, and it's called Innovative Learning Week. The students have quite wisely renamed it Innovative Drinking Week, because it just turned into this excuse to take a week off classes. But the original purpose was that for that week you were supposed to do cultural activities that were relevant to your department. And all it was let's have a manga event, or let's sit in a room and read anime or something. And I said, let's do something a bit more in tune with Definitive Drinking Week. So I said, I'll hold a sake tasting. And I knew absolutely nothing about sake whatsoever. But to my surprise, the teacher said, yeah, great idea. There's some money, go and buy some sake. But after we did the first one, and the next day, I wasn't really sure if it had been well received or anything. But the teachers said, look, Andy, that was brilliant. We absolutely have to do that again next year. So it kind of upped the stakes, and I realized I had to study about it for the next time. And during that process of learning about sake, obviously became very interested in it. But I sort of thought, well, for my dissertation, that's two birds killed with one stone. So that's where it started to get kind of, my study of it leveled up a wee bit. And of course, during my year abroad is when you're supposed to be, doing the bulk of your research. So it was great. I thought I'll go around bars and drink lots of sake, and that'll be it. But I was lucky that I found someone in Okayama who is actually an exporter. And he was absolutely fantastic. We're still good friends to this day. But he took me around all these fantastic Sakagura breweries in Okayama. And one of them was my future employer. I didn't know it at the time, but that was kind of, me laying the foundations, I suppose, my connections for one day stepping into the brewery.
Oh, that's great. So you are full-time employed with Fukucho Sake, so Imada Shuzo. Can you tell us a bit about the brewery you're working at now?
It's I suppose it's relatively young. It was founded in the first year of the Meiji period. So in general terms, it is, for sake brewery terms, it's actually quite a young brewery. The town, being honest, Akitsu, there's not much left nowadays. It's a very depopulated town. But in the past, it was extremely important for Hiroshima sake, or the history of Hiroshima sake. If I could give you one sort of takeaway from it, Fukucho is famous for soft water brewing, and soft water brewing and ginjo production tend to go hand in hand. It's they say low and slow style of fermentation, which produces a very distinct style of sake. And I guess it was a very typical brewery up until about 20, 30 years ago, making mostly futsushu. But a lot has sort of changed in the industry, and there was a lot that needed to modernize. And one of them was obviously the system of master brewers was kind of starting to fade, where you had seasonal teams that would come in working under what they call a toji, and they would do that for the winter, and then they would go home in the summer and tend to rice fields. But that system's kind of all but gone now, and the breweries, the president's daughter was working in Tokyo at the time during the bubble economy, and when the bubble popped, she decided to come back to Hiroshima and try and turn the brewery around. So that was the point about 30 years ago, where the brewery really started to focus on what the region was famous for, which is soft water brewing, ginjo style sake. We actually make quite a wide range of styles now, but the core of Fukucho is ginjo brewing.
Yeah. I've of course had Fukucho sake many times, and I love it. It's delicious. I also did a sake seminar with Miho-san, who's the Toji,
right.
and she introduced me to sparkling sake and a real variety of flavors of the sake, which I had never experienced before. She's very knowledgeable. You guys were in Sake Mistresses, Simone Maynard's series. You were the very first.
We were the guinea pigs.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Taste with the Toji series, and she's gone on to do many interviews like this with Toji brewers around Japan, right? It's a fantastic series.
Yeah, it's a fantastic series. I mean, to be honest, when we first got approached by Simone to do it, I didn't really know Simone that well, to be honest. I mean, we, to the level of exchanging a few messages on Facebook and what have you. But she asked us to do this show just as the screws were starting to turn on COVID-19, and maybe that was me that I had in my head that it was just kind of, the two of us going to sit in a room, drink sake, and talk to an online audience, and that is how it turned out. But of course, Taste with the Toji has just gone on to much greater heights than that first very casual episode. I think it lasted about 4.5 hours or something, and it pretty much was just a conversation with us and this live audience. So it's fantastic to be in the first people, but it's good to see that the quality has gone up since that first episode. But Simone's done a fantastic job, and it's just been the perfect thing to have happened to keep everyone connected during the pandemic. But it's also opened up new boundaries as well. I don't think there's ever been a time, in fact, I'm sure there's never been a time where breweries have had such a good relationship with their customers. The fact that they can now speak to them directly, there's no barrier, language barrier anymore. Every time there's just a Japanese speaker, then Simone puts on one of the fantastic interpreters. So it's really kind of changed the game, I think.
It's fantastic to also just promote the sake industry more. I was talking to Stephen Lyman. He's a shochu expert in Japan, and he often talks about sake is actually more well known abroad and much safer in terms of that recognizability and people at least knowing what it is. Shochu is sold mostly in Japan, but you have kind of an opposite problem with sake. In Japan, sales seem to be going down, even though there might be international recognition. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of an old conversation now because it's been going on for so long. But there's not just one reason why it's happened, but for sure the image of sake took several dents, back 30, 40 years ago, and it's the sales have been in a sort of steady decline ever since. Some of that is just down to the fact that younger people drink less, and drinking habits have changed. But other things of popularity of other drinks from overseas, particularly wine, of course, and beer has definitely replaced sake a long time ago as the kind of drink of choice for izakayas and that type of thing. And so there's not one reason, but in general they've all kind of accumulated, and it has hurt the industry. But at the same time, sake's popularity has been on the rise overseas. And there was a very famous, it's now famous within brewing circles anyway, the only non-Japanese master brewer said decades ago that what he hoped for was a boomerang effect, that if sake can go overseas and become popular, and Japanese people can then see that, that they will then sit up and take notice and say, wow, this is our national drink. We should be more proud of this and pay more attention to it. But I think that has already happened. I do now believe that there's more and more young people. Maybe I'm just being optimistic, but it feels like there's more younger people taking an interest in Nihonshu. There seems to be, no shortage of, specialist bars that you can go to and just try hundreds of different varieties at the same time. So yeah, I always try and stay optimistic that actually, even domestically, although the volume is going down, the quality and the variety is definitely improving.
Yeah, wonderful. Rob Dyer has joined us. Say maybe sake will see a revival the same way gin has in the UK. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, gin's starting to become popular here, so that's not going to do Nihonshu sales any good. Yeah, I liked, maybe I'm sort of in my own, echo chamber a bit too much, but I'm always positive about Nihonshu in Japan with Japanese people. I know a lot of people that if they're into sake, they're into it in a very, very big way. And sake is getting so much attention overseas now. There's tasting competitions like Kura Master, and one thing that's constantly popular and gets Japanese people's attention is anything to do with France. I don't quite know the history behind that, but France is one country in particular that's taken a real interest in sake, and that boomerang effect. I think that's already happened. So you see much more variety in on the shelves in sake stores. So yeah, I'm positive about the future. I think the key thing being the variety. As the variety improves, then I think you'll see more people start to pay more attention to it.
Yeah, wonderful. I mentioned before we started that I had Hannah Kirshner on the talk show series, and she talked about her book. And I'm rereading it now, and in the sake section where she's learning how to brew sake. And I had no idea how intensive it is. Now, I also read your blog, and you're talking about your first time, even just the first day is just incredible. It's really long days, quite intense. Can you take us back to your first day making sake?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I kind of got a real scare when I walked into the brewery. I didn't know what to expect, at all, really going into it. Everyone had said, "Oh, it's going to be really hard," but I never actually spoke to anyone that had actually experienced doing it. So, I didn't know that was actually going to be the case, but I really thought it was going to be a lot more gradual. That they would kind of break me in gently. But like the moment I turned up at work, it was chori, or the kind of I guess you'd call it like an assembly or something, where it was freezing cold, and everyone just got together outside. We all stood outside, and there was just this like rapid fire meeting between the toji and what they call the kashira, who's really the head of the brewery. The toji is the overall head of production, but the kashira kind of runs the show behind the scenes. And the next thing I knew, we were all I'm just sort of following in behind these people, and the minute we entered the brewery, they all just kind of scattered off, and they knew exactly what they were doing. And the next thing, I had this big, heavy container of freshly steamed rice in my hand, and I was getting shouted at to go up the stairs. And they were using it to make koji. So yeah, it was very, very intense. But there's a lot of things that I wish I'd known, to prepare better. One of them being the cold. It is outrageously cold in a sake brewery, by design. I mean, there's holes in the walls everywhere. It's basically like being outside, but you're in the middle of winter. And so that first season, I was not prepared for the physicality of it, but B, just how how uncomfortable an environment it can be. But of course, you get used to it, and you start to learn how to deal with it better, and it becomes, well, most of the time, good fun.
Oh, amazing. And before we started, you talked about it's basically 6 months of intensive brewing. And you gave an example of a documentary, The Birth of Sake, and it's run by a very traditional group that actually they live together, eat together, sleep together for the full 6 months. But that hasn't been your experience, right?
I only did that for 1 year, and I did that in my first brewery. And the reason it was only for 1 year is both of the breweries I work for, as I say, that system that you can see in that film. It's a brilliant film, by the way. I recommend anyone to watch it if they're interested in sake brewing. But they operate on an old toji system, where the toji is effectively being hired from outside, and he gathers a team, and then for 6 months they all come in. They all, as you just said, they all live together, 3 meals a day together. They're sharing the same bathing facilities. It's very, very full on. My first kura and this kura as well, they gave up that system decades ago. But for the way it worked out when I was living in Okayama, I kind of wanted to do it. That I wanted to experience it, and I kind of had fears that I was never going to get to experience it at my last place. But as it worked out, a contract expired in my apartment, and I was in the transition of moving out of that town anyway, and it was going to be very expensive to get a short-term rental. So the Toji at the time was very kind, and he said, "Why don't you? We'll do minimum renovations, because we can't just renovate the place to make it fit for living again." He said, "But why don't you do a season in the brewery?" He does that anyway. He stays there, but that's his mother's house is like joined on to the brewery, so he's got a bit better facilities than I had. But I jumped to the chance, so I got the previous Toji's room, and a very, very dingy bathroom. But yeah, I spent one very, very cold, miserable season living in this brewery in Okayama Prefecture. But it was a fantastic experience, because it was up, crack of dawn, up at like 5:30 to start work at 5:30, to do the first work of the day with the Toji. And the normal the other staff wouldn't start work until 8 o'clock. So I really got to see, the hardships that a Toji goes through, particularly the Toji, because they really never have any real peace and quiet during that 6 months. And then the last work of the day was normally about 9:30, where we'd just do a quick bit of work in the what they call the koji muro, which is where they cultivate the all important koji. And so it was you have breaks in between, but it's all the way through the day, so it consumes your entire existence, basically, while the season's going on. But as I said, it was a fantastic experience to see the real challenge that a master brewer has to go through to put sake on someone's table.
Yeah, I had, until I read your blog, until I read Hannah Kirshner's book, I didn't realize how completely intense it was. And it's really a full-time job for 6 months for a group of people. And this is what we were talking about before we started. You were saying this is one of the reasons it's so difficult during coronavirus, as well as going to become more difficult during climate change, and as the heat picks up and it gets hotter and hotter. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, bear in mind, I've not been brewing relatively long. I mean, I finished my 5th season this summer, but even in just that short time, you can hear conversations, you can notice things yourself. You know, my first season, I remember being so cold. I mean, just unbelievably cold, like shivering all the way until I got in the front door. And then the last couple of years, I mean, it was only the neighbouring prefectures. It's not like it's a different part of Japan. It's just been getting warmer and warmer. You know, it felt like that real cold snap that happens was just getting later and later and later, and none of that's good for sake brewing. It really isn't. The master brewer in particular has to completely rethink strategy, because sake brewing is really, we work to a temperature, and the slightest change in temperature from what we're aiming for can send that batch of sake off in a completely different direction. So it really is a concern, and I think sustainability and things is very much these kind of conversations are just beginning in the sake industry, but there are a few big names, including the one in that film that I just mentioned, that are starting to say that we need to kind of really take notice of this, because rice cultivation is extremely important for sake brewing, as is the temperature and the environment when we're actually making it. So it has a lot at stake if the temperature keeps rising. And it's interesting because just this week there was a NHK feature on a brewery from, I think, Okayama that moved to Hokkaido, because the temperature, what they remember, is completely different now than what it was when they started brewing. And they think that they have to go to Hokkaido to ensure that they can make that kind of sake in the future. So yeah, it's definitely a big concern for the whole industry.
Yeah. And one of the things that when I first came to Japan, I didn't realize how important sake is for our landscape. When you drive around Japan and you see all the rice fields cut into the mountains, or in summer now, all the rice fields filled with water and all the greenery everywhere, breaking up the concrete, even in the cities. Rice is so important visually and culturally. We have festivals connected to rice, that it's so connected to the fabric of Japanese society and community. But it's also very connected to the environment, because the basic ingredients, rice, water, koji, yeast, that you lay out so beautifully in your website, it has to be pure, it has to be the best. So I think in terms of sustainability, it's so important to talk about sake. It's such an important product.
Yeah, absolutely. And the discussion on sustainability in sake is obviously, multifaceted. There's so many different angles that you can look at it. You can look at the obvious ones like packaging or something, being more sustainable in your packaging. But there's also the raw ingredients, as you say. Rice cultivation is, some people say that that's the first stage in sake brewing. Before you've even, before the brewers have even turned up, it's going on over the summer. And outside of that, you have how the sake is handled is a big topic of conversation for how you keep sake cooled and things like that. There's a lot sort of going on with that conversation as well. That maybe going forward, we need to rethink how we promote sake in that sense as well. Maybe it's not necessarily to have so much refrigeration in breweries. But yeah, the one very, very big obvious one, of course, is rice cultivation. And as you say, it's so it's the core of Japan. It's that kind of rice cultivation. You know, when people come to Japan, I know lots of people that say, you know, isn't it great when you see all the rice paddies and they're flooded like that, or isn't it great when you see them just before harvest? And you know, it really builds a picture of Japan when you think of the different seasons. You kind of tend to gravitate towards what stage the rice fields are at. So.
Yeah. I can't imagine Japan without the rice paddies. And I'm so grateful in summer for rice paddy in my neighborhood, which is between the buildings and mansions, and it keeps us cooler, even though we're in the city center. There's so many wonderful connections to other businesses, not just sake businesses, not just agriculture rice growers. There's people who do the labels and bottling, and there's a lot of support businesses around sake breweries, right?
Well, hugely. I mean, you know, having a brewery in in a small town that, you know, admittedly Japan has a huge problem with depopulation, and you know, we've all been to, you know, towns, and you know, if you go to, you know, Kochi and or Tokushima, for example, and you see these towns that just died, you know, long ago. And you know, if you have a sake brewery in one of these towns, it completely revitalizes you know, everything around it, and not just by providing employment for the brewers in you know, that work there, or you know, all the other staff as well, which are obviously very vital as well. As you see, people that are doing, you know, labels and bottling and organizing the office and things. But you know, obviously that around gives farmers reason to cultivate particularly expensive sake rice. And then there's dealing with you know, the offshot of, you know, the you know, things like when you're polishing rice, you're given what's left is things like nuka, and you know, the powder of it, and sake kasu. You know, there's a lot that gets recycled from the brewing process, and then obviously retailers as well, and restaurants and bars, and you know, everything really is so closely interconnected within the sake industry, and that, you know, having a healthy brewery has a knock-on effect for a lot of other industries as well.
Sorry, I just had a phone call disturbing me, but I've closed it, so it's fine.
That's all right.
It's live streaming. It's always difficult. Talking about the process, you lay this out so beautifully on your website, from rice polishing to steaming rice to making the mash to washing and soaking rice. There's so many different parts of the process. I hadn't realized it's so complicated. When you said you've been doing it for 5 seasons now, so you've learned a lot. Do you have a favorite part of the process, or a part that you find most challenging?
It tends to vary. So when I first started brewing, I was, in fact, there's a picture up on the screen in the center there, washing and soaking. My first toji, it's quite unusual for someone to have this opinion, but he placed washing and soaking as the most important part in the process. Most people say koji production, and I've never met a toji that doesn't put huge emphasis on it. But because of my previous toji, he was really he had a brilliant system of doing washing and soaking. I really got interested in that, and actually, I still think it's one of the most fascinating aspects of sake brewing. It's such a fine balancing act of how you handle the ingredients, and you can really affect how so many other processes later down the line, whether they go smoothly or whether you're going to have a lot more work on your hands just by that one stage. But recently, I was very lucky actually that this season I was made the motoya, which is the yeast, or put in charge of making the yeast starter, and that was quite nerve wracking, because if you make a mistake on that, it's very, very serious. So it would be a very long conversation to go into it, but it's a very, very crucial part of the process, and I hadn't had any experience doing it before. But luckily, my senpai and Imada-san were watching me nearly the whole time to make sure I didn't do anything terrible. Yeah, I think I did about 10 or 12 tanks out of the 40 that we made. So yeah, but that really kind of caught my attention for basically the entire season. I was just studying, how to make moto, and more traditional methods as well, which we actually did for the first time at Fukucho this season as well.
Yeah, it's so many different parts of the process. The making the main mash together, of course, during coronavirus, like you said, it'd be great if everybody got a vaccine as soon as possible, because you're working in very close knit environment. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I've said to so many people that I'm sure there's other really bad work environments, but it really couldn't be much worse for something like that in working in a sake brewery. As I said, taking time off, short of the most severe circumstances, is not an option. We have enough staff just to get the job done. I've never seen one of my toji admit to being ill. Sometimes they clearly are. But I was actually informed at one point by my senior at my last brewery, don't do that again. And my mistake was I'd said to the toji, I said, "Oh, you've got a cold, haven't you?" And I was told not to say that to them because toji don't get ill. So there's still that kind of traditional element of it that's lingered in the industry, where these guys and girls will come in on their hands and knees, because they simply can't take time off, which is obviously not good for when you've got a terrible virus doing the rounds. But yeah, we all work in very, very close proximity. We eat together. Going into the mural that I mentioned before, making koji, I mean, that's a humid, closed environment by design. So yeah, it's something like that is kind of unthinkable. Touch wood, lucky that never happened during the 2 seasons that we've worked under during the pandemic. But I can't imagine what would happen if one of us was to get sick from it. So yeah, it's kind of unthinkable. But yeah, so we're all looking forward to our vaccination, put it that way.
That's great that the vaccinations are rolling out, because if you're going to start brewing season in September, it'd be great if everybody's on their way to being vaccinated. Let's talk about some of the other parts of the process. So filtration, pressing. Can you tell us about some of the other parts of the process? Pasteurization?
Sure. Filtration's probably the most, filtration's probably one of the least interesting ones, because it's becoming less and less popular in the to actually do it at all in the premium categories. It gets done for mainly for futsushu nowadays, but they used to do it for nearly everything, because there was what was considered best was clear sake, so it had to be a kind of watery color. But the consumer preferences have changed since then. In my 5 seasons, I've only ever done filtration for futsushu, which is table sake. At Imada Shuzo, we don't make futsushu; it's all 100%. what they call Tokutei Shoshu, or premium categories of sake. So we have absolutely no charcoal filtration whatsoever. There isn't even the means to do it in the brewery. Some of the sake gets put through a microfilter, but a very, very small percentage of it. And that just is completely different from doing charcoal filtration. It keeps the colour, the colour stays the same. And if you pick up a bottle of Fukucho, you will invariably see colour in the sake, because we're not trying to, to hide its true nature. So yeah, that's filtration. It's in there because it's a very, very important part of the process. But nowadays it's becoming a lot less common to see it done. Pressing, on the other hand, is 100% necessary. It isn't safe unless you separate the solids from the liquids, and that's done with pressing. And actually, a lot of people that are new to sake mix these two up. I suppose it's kind of a method of filtration is pressing. Filtration it's on paper it sounds similar, but that's the point in pressing. You're removing the sake solids and the lees, what they call kasu in Japanese, which is a brilliant byproduct of sake brewing, by the way, from the liquids. And if you don't do that, it doesn't get to be called seishu, which is a legal definition. There's a few ways to do it, and what you're seeing there is, I suppose, the most common way of doing it, which is it's kind of like a big accordion-like press, which the sake gets put into to these kind of cloth bags with a very, very heavy steel plate in between it, and the sake gets pushed through these mesh bags, and that's what separates them. And the kasu collects in the center. So yeah, probably your average consumer is not interested in these types of steps, but for sake brewers, then there's a whole rabbit hole you can go down for each of them.
That's so interesting. I'd never seen the pressing before. I'd love to see that in the brewery. Let's talk about bottling, because we were talking about this as a sustainable initiative that, of course, they used to do all the time in Japan. And so few sake shops do it now, where you would get the bottle, you drink the bottle, you take back the bottle, they wash the bottle, reuse the bottle. So it's so nice to see that you can still buy sake in big bottles. Are they reused or new bottles only? Are they?
Yeah, and this is something that's appropriate for a talk about sustainability. I love Isho beans. That's the 1.8 litre bottles. I'm convinced, as are others, that sake actually tastes better from them. I have a couple of theories as to why, but nothing is obviously proven. But yeah, I'm absolutely convinced that sake does taste better from them. Probably because, well, two things. Probably because they get a little bit more time, a little bit more exposure to oxygen. One of the big misconceptions of sake is that it's like wine and that you have to drink it very, very quickly. You certainly don't. There are some that you would be advised to drink sooner than others. But sake is in general very, very stable, as long as you avoid severe temperature changes and it doesn't like exposure to light, and that's really its Achilles heel. So that's one reason why I think sake tastes better from an Isho bin. The other is for pasteurized stuff. If you're pasteurizing in a bottle, I think it's much more gentle on the sake to be in a bigger vessel than the smaller Yongo bean. But yeah, to answer your question, people still bring these, it's always local people, obviously, but people still bring these big bottles back to us, and we sometimes buy them secondhand as well. Isho beans are definitely recycled over and over again. That's kind of standard practice in the industry. Some don't. Some insist on new bottles every time. But Isho beans get recycled. Yongo beans tend not to, though, and that's a problem. Because Isho beans in the past, where that was the bottle of choice, all the containers, 2 generations of containers, it started with these wooden ones, and now it's the plastic, what they call a pea case. They only hold Isho beans, the larger bottles. There's nothing industry standard for the Yongo bean, the 720 ml size. And so it's a logistical nightmare of where you keep them, how do you rewash them and everything. And one side effect of the pandemic has been that the number of Isho bean sales is dropping very, very rapidly, and Yongo bean is rising. So that's one thing that hasn't been good for sustainability. People drinking at home because izakayas aren't open. People may be buying a bit more expensive sake, but in smaller sizes because they're getting a bit more, adventurous with what they're drinking. That's basically it. So there was even at one point people were fearing that people would just stop using the larger bottles.
I
Sincerely,
love,
that isn't the case.
yeah, I love the large bottles. They're so impressive. You can see the label clearly. And of course, it's so cheap. I cannot get over how inexpensive good sake is in Japan.
Yeah.
This was, I think, 1,500 yen. Like, just unbelievable. Like,
that's a great sake that you have in your hand there.
15 bucks. Yeah, I love this one. Yeah. It was a present.
Yeah, they're just up the road from us. So
Wonderful. But now I know that the big bottles are reused, washed and reused. I'm never going to buy a smaller bottle. It's all big bottles from here.
Brilliant. Well, I feel proud that I've just increased the sales of sake somewhat tonight. So.
That's wonderful. Rob has a question. Is there a formal system for recycling the bottles between retailers, bars, and the breweries? Good question.
Good question. Not that I'm aware of. I'm sure it differs from prefecture to prefecture, but there must be some system that gets them, because, as I say, we get them in these big pallets, and they're already kind of delabeled, because obviously, at my admittedly, one of the drawbacks to using them is at my last brewery. We had a lot of people locally. It was a bigger town, to be fair, but we would receive a lot more of these from the local izakayas. In Akitsu, there isn't any local izakayas. All we get is just local people that bring them back in very small volumes. But at Juhatsu Zakari, we were getting them direct from the izakayas, and some of the labels you just can't remove them. So you're getting these things, and actually you have to throw them away. So labeling was a big problem. Also, things like they would bring not just sake bottles back, but they would bring things like mirin and some really quite strong sauces and things that were in them. And obviously we can't use those because there's no matter how much you wash them, and there's still just a little bit left over. So that was one of the downsides to it. But we can order up these huge big pallets of cleaned to a certain extent, reusable bottles. So there must be somewhere where or maybe a system that it's probably better to ask someone that works in an izakaya. And it's very likely it'll be specific to different from prefecture to prefecture. But there must be a collection system for this, and then they get centralized and then put back out to the brewers. So yeah, it's a good question. I'll ask about that at the brewery tomorrow.
I love that when you go into an izakaya or a bar and they have the big bottles upside down, because they're ready to put them on tap, and you can see the labels, and it's such a fantastic way to serve the alcohol. And then if they're reusing the bottles, that's great. Rob says, would be cool if a national sake organization could coordinate a national recycling solution. I think this is so true, and not just for sake. I would love to see the old Coke machines come back, where you get your bottle of Coke and you drink it and you leave the bottle and it's washed and reused. I mean, we need to go back to that system for all drinks, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it probably, maybe it is just my imagination, but Coca-Cola from a bottle tastes better to me. There's a huge kind of super spa in Osaka. I spent a little bit of time in Osaka before I started brewing. It's called Spa World, and they still have, or at least the last time I was there, it's a few years ago to be fair, but they had the old Coke machine, where you got the bottle and everything. You know, there's a collection point for the bottles, and I'm still convinced that the best Coca-Cola I've ever had in my life was in that. You know, after I got out the onsen and drank one of those bottles. So yeah, absolutely. It's you know, I feel the same way about Coca-Cola in bottles as I do sake from big bottles. You know, definitely. Definitely try it and see what you think. I'm convinced that they taste better. So
I think so too. It's like people swear from like a diner or a restaurant where they have Coke on tap that it always tastes better. And I think that's true for the bottles as well, definitely. And Coca-Cola, we know, is one of the biggest plastic pollution contributors to the ocean plastic. So if they went back to this type of solution that we used to use, it tastes better and it's better for the environment. Let's do it. Now, I saw this on your website. I absolutely love it. Your sake haiku. Sake inspired.
Oh, okay,
haiku.
right. I'm a bit embarrassed about that.
No, I love it. So because it's rainy season right now, I chose this one. Let's see if we can bring it up bigger. And I noticed Sake Mistress was also adding some, which is nice.
She's a fellow fan of haiku. So.
Yeah, no, it's great. And it adds the atmosphere that we're missing by just drinking alone at home. So I love this. Do you want to read it for us since you wrote this?
Yeah, I can just about see it on my screen. So under rain-soaked eaves, I ponder my journey. Sunshine fills my cup. So yeah, and that was taken. That picture was taken on a very rainy day, as you can see in Akitsu, just near the station. So yeah, it was a long summer. I had a lot of time on my hands, and you know, drinking alone most of the time. Yeah, I sort of developed a way of passing the time, which was to try and write haiku, but always sake specific haiku. And that was my rule for, if you're putting on the website, there has to be a way you can explain it in relation to sake. So all of them are in some way connected to the pleasures you get from drinking sake, or something that reminds you of when you're drinking sake. And yes, Simone did some fantastic, a lot better than mine. So.
It's great. I chose yours because it was rainy season and we are still having lots of rainy days. We have about 5 more minutes. I would love for you to introduce, what do you think are the most useful sake terms? You have such a great list on your website. I'm putting it here so people can see a little bit. If someone is just trying to get into sake a little bit, what would you recommend that they ask for or look for in a sake bottle?
Well, I hesitate slightly because my whole outlook on sake is just to experiment with it. And I've always said, go into it with an open mind. And some people will say, I guess I'm kind of the opposite of what a lot of people will say in the industry, that they'll say, look for the word ginjo or something like that. it's not bad advice, but for me, the best advice to do is go into with an open mind. Don't fixate on one particular style, but just try as many as you can, and you will find something. I'm almost certain you will find something or a particular style that will, that you'll take a liking to. It really is such a versatile drink. But the other, again, I'm not really coming up with any, you know, uh, labeling terms or anything. But the other thing that I would say is probably the most misunderstood thing about sake is the temperature that you serve it. Sake's absolute party piece is the fact that it can be enjoyed at a wide range of temperatures, and there's been a real misconception, going back the last 20, maybe even longer, that warm sake equals bad sake, and that just isn't true. Bad sake is bad sake regardless of what temperature it is, and good sake is good sake regardless of what temperature it is. So if you're buying a bottle, and particularly if you're drinking at home, is experiment with the temperature of it, because you'll get a completely different drink from one temperature to the next. So yeah, if you're going to go into, hopefully we'll all be doing this in izakayas and bars and what have you. But yeah, if you're doing it in Japan, then ask for kanzake. That's the term for warm sake. And if you're doing it abroad and they've got the means to do it, don't be shy to say to them, can you warm it up, regardless of what it is. This is another thing. People say that it's only certain types. I disagree. That taste is subjective. So make your own mind up rather than just purely listening to what someone else is decided for you. So yeah, that's it. Just experiment with it. Try as many different styles as you can. Don't make any preconceptions about it, and just enjoy the journey of discovery, because it will take a long time to work your way through them all. So
That's great advice. I love that in Hannah Kirshner's book as well, that she was working in a bar and she appreciated so much the difference of the same sake, whether it was served cold or served hot or warm, and it always tasted different. And the pairing with different food made it different, and she appreciated it in different ways. So I love that advice. Just keep trying it in different ways. I would say as well, I love sake shops. And if I go in a
yeah,
sake shop, I just ask for a recommendation. And if I go back, they always ask me, did you like that? Or was it too strong? Would you like something different? Right. And then they remember me. I don't know if it's just because I'm a foreigner, but I think the sake shop staff are so good at remembering their customers and remembering what they like, and then suggesting something they might like as well. It's fantastic system.
yeah, absolutely. And you really have to, certainly for people watching, that live in Japan, and we're so fortunate if you're interested in sake, to have these amazing places, and as you said right at the start, at really reasonable prices as well. But yeah, find a nice sake shop that has a good selection, and try your best to build up a relationship with them, because as you say, they're typically extremely knowledgeable about what they're selling, and they will know by what you've said. They'll be able to find the right sake for you. So it's, yeah, getting a relationship with a good sake shop is definitely right up there, or should be right up there in your priorities if you've got aspirations to jump down the rabbit hole and really discover sake. So you're on mute, Joy.
Thank you. Thank you,
Sorry.
Andrew.
That's
So
all right.
I'm showing your beautiful website right now, Origin Sake, and I would encourage everybody to go and have a look. There's so much there about the origin, about the process. You've got great photos. You introduce breweries, different sakes that you've tasted. So really, thank you so much for all the great work you put into this. Did you start
Yeah, I
in
mean,
2017?
I'm slightly embarrassed. Yeah, I mean,
Why?
the, the, the basic simple thing is I don't have enough time to put into the website as I'd like to. There's a list as long as my arm of topics that I would like to cover, but when half of the year is a write-off, and obviously the other half of the year, I still have a job and I have family commitments, and I'd like at some point to, once the pandemic's over, to see my friends and things. So I really don't have anywhere near the amount of time to put into the website as I would like to. So I know that there's parts of it that are a bit rough around the edges, but it's done with absolutely no budget whatsoever. And it's just really been my way of documenting things that I've learned. Not necessarily things that are just written in textbooks or books, but the things that I've learned firsthand. Working for two different breweries and two different master brewers, and my own travels within Japan, and going to see breweries and things. So I think it's important to get brewers' perspectives as well, and I try and sort of share as much as that aspect as possible. But I would love one day to just take a year off and really kind of tidy it up and make it a bit more user friendly and what have you. So, but yeah, if anyone wants to look at it, I'd be delighted. So.
It's great. Yeah, you're doing more than enough. And one nice thing about having a blog is people will access the older articles for years. You don't, that story about your first day ever making sake. That's great, and it's priceless. And you can never do that again. You can never have that same impression, right? So I'm
Yeah.
really glad that you've kept it up, and when you have a chance to go back to it, you can go back to it. But when you're making sake, everybody who's looking at it appreciates that too. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'll do my best to keep it going. So, but it's been good for me as well, because as you say, my own opinions have changed since my first years, and maybe if opinions have changed drastically from what I've learned on the job, and certain things that I was told when this is how this is done, and this should be this way, and certain parts of that I've realised are not true, and my own tastes as well have kind of my own view to sake has changed as well. So it's good to kind of go back and look at it and remind myself of that kind of progression. So yeah.
Yeah, well, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining and for sharing all your
Thank you very much
insight
for having
today.
me.
Yeah, wonderful. And I look forward to, after we have our vaccine, to come and visiting you at Fukucho and sampling and meeting up and talking to Miho Imada-san too. That'll be wonderful.
Yeah, I'll look forward to a drink sometime in Hiroshima as well. So
That'd be great.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. Tomorrow,
Yeah, thank you very
lunchtime.
much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Tomorrow, lunchtime, we're talking with Ken Mukai, who runs a brewery, a craft brewery in Kochi. So we'll be talking about beer tomorrow. This is alcohol week, I guess.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you, Andrew. Bye.